the newspaper killed him once before he had really begun to live. It was October 1907, and word came from Berkeley that the youngest son of a well-known West Side family had died after an illness. The local newspaper printed the story, named his parents, listed his brothers and sisters, and told its readers that the young man was gone. There was only one problem. He wasn't dead. A message concerning illness in the family had been misunderstood. His mother had died. Her son was still very much alive. The newspaper had given him an obituary years before he needed one. Looking back now, there is something almost prophetic about the mistake. The boy who had once been reported dead would spend much of his life routinely doing things that might have made the original report come true. 3 years later, the West Side Index provided unmistakable evidence that our mystery man was alive. On March 14, 1910, the paper reported that he was a cadet at Mount Tamalpais Academy and had returned home for his midterm vacation. He eventually graduated from the military academy. He was coming of age at precisely the moment when a new machine was transforming American life, and he seems to have embraced it immediately. The automobile offered something horses and wagons could not: speed. By 1916, the newspapers were reporting his adventures behind the wheel. He was caught driving a national automobile at 45 miles per hour and fined $20. The following year came another confrontation involving the car the West Side Index called his Red Racer. A marshal decided he was in no condition to drive it. The young man disagreed. The marshal insisted. So did the driver. The encounter ended with another $20 fine. Only days later, another local motorist was cited after allegedly racing him. By then, the newspapers seemed almost amused by his appetite for speed. This was no isolated incident. He raced automobiles, collected fines, and wrecked his share of them. He called automobiles machines, and machines did not always remain intact around him. He was becoming a genuine West Side daredevil. Then America entered the First World War, and the young man who had spent years testing automobiles was introduced to a much faster machine. He enlisted first in the artillery and then transferred into aviation. By 1917, he was studying aviation at Berkeley. Training followed in San Diego. By March 1918, he had earned a commission as a lieutenant and was sent east to await orders for France. His hometown newspaper immediately understood the irony. The man who had been trying to make automobiles go faster was reportedly headed for scout duty in an airplane capable of approximately 175 miles per hour. The West Side Index joked that this was about 100 miles per hour faster than he had ever managed in an automobile, although he had certainly done his darndest. It may be the perfect contemporary description of him. The West Side Speedster had finally found a machine fast enough. Then he went to war. He entered the extraordinary fraternity of the earliest American military aviators. His aviation story crossed paths with Quentin Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's youngest son, who also became an American pilot in France. These young men were flying at a moment when military aviation itself was barely out of its infancy. Their aircraft were fragile, their engines temperamental, their instruments primitive, and the margin between adventure and death was extraordinarily thin. Later newspaper accounts described our mystery pilot's wartime record with two particularly appropriate words: bravery and daring. They also reported that he survived a serious fall from an airplane. Whether in an automobile or an aircraft, wrecking a machine apparently did not necessarily mean the end of the adventure, and France did not extinguish his appetite for aviation. After the war came more flying. There were exhibitions and the Air Circus, part of that extraordinary post-war period when aviators transformed flying into public spectacle. He dropped leaflets from an airplane. He became associated with the spectacular Los Angeles fire dive. He continued doing the sorts of things that made people look toward the sky. Risk was not an isolated episode in this man's life. It was becoming the thread that connected the chapters. Then came June 3rd, 1921. The newspapers would call what happened next his wild ride. He climbed into another machine and headed down the state highway. Soon, motorists were reporting an automobile traveling at extraordinary speed. Contemporary estimates approached 90 miles per hour. The machine swerved across the roadway. Then a tire blew. He kept going. Another tire failed. He kept going. The tyres were being shredded beneath the machine, but the driver continued west. At Tracy, he collided with another automobile. 3 occupants of that car were injured, suffering injuries that included a broken arm, a broken breastbone, and a broken leg. Most men would have stopped. Our mystery driver kept going. He continued toward Altamont. Near a railroad bridge under construction, the wild ride finally reached its spectacular conclusion. The automobile skidded and rolled once, twice, 3 times. Considering everything that had happened, the extraordinary speed, the ruined tyres, the collision at Tracy, and now a multiple rollover, what happened next sounds almost like something invented years later to embellish the legend. But it came from the eyewitness account. He got out, and then, standing beside another wrecked machine, he pulled out a cigarette and asked for a light. If one wanted a single scene to capture this man's personality, it would be difficult to find a better one. His automobile had just rolled repeatedly. The machine was wrecked. He had survived yet another violent encounter with speed. And apparently, one of his immediate concerns was finding a match. The aftermath produced sensational newspaper coverage. Explanations were offered involving his experiences in France and what people in 1921 called shell shock. One version had him imagining an airplane overhead and reliving experiences from the war. Those reports are part of the historical record and should not be discarded. His wartime experiences may indeed have affected him profoundly. But there is another consideration. After a high-speed journey that injured 3 other people, explanations emphasizing a wartime medical condition could also lessen the appearance of criminal responsibility and potentially reduce the consequences he faced. The most dramatic versions of the story, therefore, deserve to be presented as contemporary claims rather than unquestioned fact. More importantly, describing the wild ride simply as the behavior of a disturbed veteran misses the man we can document before 1921. He loved speed before the war. He raced automobiles before the war. He collected speeding fines before the war. He drove the Red Racer before the war. His hometown newspaper joked about his driving before the war. Then he volunteered for military service, transferred into aviation, earned a lieutenant's commission, went overseas, flew in the world of men such as Quentin Roosevelt, survived the hazards of wartime aviation, and continued flying afterward. The wild ride did not suddenly introduce danger into his life. Danger had been riding beside him for years. That is what makes the mistaken obituary of 1907 such an extraordinary beginning to his story. The newspaper declared him dead while he was still a boy. He then spent years doing things that seemed almost calculated to test whether the newspaper had merely been premature. He raced machines, he wrecked machines, he flew machines, he went to war in one, he survived a fall from one, he participated in aerial exhibitions, he dropped leaflets from the sky. He took part in an air circus. He was associated with the Los Angeles fire dive. Then came the wild ride of 1921. 2 ruined tyres, a collision, tremendous speed, and a machine rolling 3 times. And somehow at the end of it, the man who had once read his own premature obituary was still standing, looking for a light. Perhaps the wrong question has been asked about him for more than a century. The sensational headlines encouraged readers to wonder what could possibly have possessed a man to drive like that. But when his life is reconstructed from the beginning, a different question emerges. What else would we have expected him to do? He was a West Side ranch boy who became a military school cadet, a cadet who became a notorious motorist, a motorist who became an aviator who became a lieutenant who went to France, a veteran who came home and continued flying, a daredevil who repeatedly wrecked his machines and somehow kept walking away from them. The newspaper had killed him once. For years afterward, he seemed determined to prove that death would have to work considerably harder than that. More than a century later, his descendants were astonished when the forgotten pieces of his life were put back together. I know the name of this gentleman. Do you?